at impact. And you know what the blast will measure. Where is loft? Increased loft. So I like to see the putter release and pass my hands. And I don't know if you have a tour standard here, or is it 0? It's what?
Half a degree.
It's half a degree. The half degree is the loft increase. Yeah, probably the worst would be decrease with hands too far forward. And I've always had a feeling that the putter passes the handle, the putter head passes the handle soon after impact, and I never thought of that as breakdown. I always thought of that as release. So you know, it releases this way, and the toe will pass the heel as well. I think it's a good question. I don't know that there's one magic answer that's gonna correct. We would all agree on that. And there's so many putters now that have different faces with different grooves that can affect the loft. You know, again, how you come in or out of the ball. But probably the worst thing you could do is have crushing down on the ball and making it bounce all over. It's a good question. I think while we're here, if I hit a putt now, let's keep it on backstroke length. I'm going to pretend this was a 40-foot putt. You'll see the length of the stroke get a lot bigger. You'll see the impact stroke speed change. So almost twice as long on a 40-footer, and a loft decrease. So that's in the range, right?
Yep.
And the numbers, right? So
the ratio is exactly the same.
the ratios are pretty close, aren't they? 0.57 within that 2/100ths of where I usually am. And here's the tendency for most players. When they get on the course, the closer they get to the hole, the quicker the stroke gets, right, Mike? With the closer you get to the hole, tour players, right? This isn't just the average. So most people get the stroke too short and too quick, and when they get farther away from the hole, their stroke gets too slow. So they don't get enough. Does it get too slow, too long, or too slow and just too slow and too long? So next time you go out there and practice putting, if you're having trouble, you know, we get asked a lot of times, how do you do better at your lag putting? Well, maybe it's I need to speed up the stroke on my backswing for my long putts. And Mike, I'd love to have you come up here for a second. And Mike knows not only a lot about blast because he founded it, but he knows a lot about what tour players do and tendencies. And would you say that if you had somebody come up for the first time and you were going to work with a tour player, is the first thing you work on the timing of the stroke?
It is, yeah. So again, looking at all the variables, what we want to start to see constant. So can I make all the variables constant? So one of the constants that I can make is timing. So backstroke time and forestroke time, like with Brad and the elite putters, is a very constant with backstroke time and forestroke time. The other thing that we see is their backstroke length to forestroke speed is also constant. So those two ratios never change. It doesn't matter if Brad's playing at Augusta or if he's playing the British Open, whatever it is, those ratios always stay the same. So that's really interesting.
So, did everybody hear what he said? Does anybody need it repeated? If we can keep those ratios, the timing ratios and the speeds consistent, everything else takes care of itself. And have you seen dramatic improvements when a player improves their timing in the other metrics of loft and lie?
Yeah, I think Slew's a great story.
Well, Jeff Sluman, Slew, maybe was one of the most psychotic putters, and he one of the great players, not only of all time, but especially on the senior tour. Short little guy that hit the ball long for his size and always wrestled with this part of the game. But nobody spent more time with you than Jeff Sluman. So what has he done that's so well?
So I think, you know, for Slew, the big thing was, as we were talking about earlier, like anyone that's really struggling with putting, what we see 90% of the time is their backstroke length gets very long and the time gets very slow compared to other players. So we're out there in Tucson and we're having Brad and Lauren and many other players looking at those patterns. So Slew got on it, and from 6 inches, he was taking it back 6-inch distance. He'd taken it back 12 inches. So not only was he taking it back 12 inches, but his face was rotating double digits. So he was anywhere from 11 to 12 degrees of rotation. He's like, I can't understand why I'm having so much trouble. And he's tried every other putter and training aid and every type of putter that was out there. It wasn't going to be better. So what we did right away was literally we moved him from 6 inches and had him work on his timing. Moved his timing, which was 0.9 seconds, down to 0.6 seconds, and all of a sudden he started feeling different with the putter, as well as the ball was going differently.
The great story that Mike's leaving out is Jeff Sluman is now, or last year, was the #1 ranked putter on the Champions Tour. So he went from what? 55 out of 80 guys to #1. And that's within a year of working on solely his timing. And he's a diligent guy. He's out there every day on the putting green. He's got the app out every day. He's got the phone on the ground. And he works on his timing. And I've seen him do it with the short putts, the medium length putts, the putts you really want to make 5, 6, 7, 8 footers, and then the long putts. And he's a testimony to that. And I would also say, I was asked a few months ago, before the start of the season, to watch Justin Thomas hit some putts. And I was nervous. It was the week before the FedEx Cup final round, the Tour Championship final week, before the Ryder Cup was selected, and Justin Thomas was just outside that threshold of being an automatic pick. And he knew he needed to play that well. So when if you're an instructor, you're nervous. You're careful. You don't want to mess the guy up that's played pretty well. And I lived down in Jupiter, Florida, went to the Bears Club where he practices, watched him hit a few putts, talked to him a little bit about his mindset going into this event. And I said, look, I got this little device. I'm going to just measure some numbers. I don't want you to look at it. The stroke looked very short to me and slow. But I wanted to confirm all this stuff before I said anything. He's not a very technical kid, but I think he's a bright, quiet kid. We looked a little bit at the time. He was a little slow. I said, what do you feel about lightening your stroke a little bit and kind of speeding it up? And, he kind of looked at me physically, and then all of a sudden, he goes, yeah, that feels better. And you can see it automatically. When you watch this, you can see it. His numbers were better. He had pretty good rotational numbers. And he went out and he played okay. He missed the Ryder Cup by a guy or two. Then he won the CIMB Classic. He shot 3 under. In the last 2 weeks, he shot a 59. He won both the tournaments in Hawaii. And I just kind of texted him. I said, hey, you do anything different? You working on anything? No. Why would I work on anything different than timing? And, here's a guy that didn't need to be babysat. It wasn't working on any technical thought. So what this device really, what you sold me on, what Blast and everybody here that works for Blast sold me on is, when you think about a great player who's just finished a great round and they talk about how you putted, how you played, it's never technical thoughts. I saw the line today. I just was able to, I saw a big hole. It's all more right brain. I felt like I hit every putt in the middle of the club face. There really aren't technical thoughts. And I think that some of the great players that you've seen, that I've seen, they've been able to keep it simple. And what I like is you get to see, when this device is registered to each person that buys one, every stroke goes up there somewhere into that cloud and ends up at Blast Laboratories. And the old scientist over here can send you a graph and screw you up. But so the question was, there any correlation to in the backswing to the opening and the closing of the face? You want to answer that question?
Yeah, so the question is really, what is that face doing during that motion, right? So if the putting stroke maybe is too long or too slow. Yeah, so what we see is the face starts to wobble. So as you make this longer stroke, in this slower stroke, it starts to wobble. It starts twisting. Yeah, we call it shaft twist, right? So Brad and I are looking at graphs and looking at data, it's like, how's the shaft twist? So when you see a stroke get really slow and really long, it starts wobbling. Again, this is capturing at 500 frames per second, very precise at portions of a degree. So we see this club wobbling. Now with the great players, it doesn't wobble. And that was what was really interesting, is when the great players hit putts, it doesn't matter what it is. We had Brad take putts inside hotel rooms. It's like, it's the same data. Yeah, he's on a super, super fast green, it's the same data. Downhiller, same data. So when the putters get really, really long and slow, it starts wobbling. So remember, you're not just changing face angle, you're changing lie angle. You're not just changing my angle, now I change the direction. So it's direction, the lie, and the loft are all changing. Now you know this as an athlete, and now this thing is out of alignment. So what are you going to do? If I just accelerate at a constant acceleration and change that velocity, now that putter face is not aimed at my target. So I got to hit the brakes, and then maybe hit the gas, and hit the brakes, and hit the gas, and hopefully line it up. And we see golfers do that, but it's all because of the way they load that golf club or their backstroke time.
Like a bicycle,
It is. Great analogy. Yeah, you say a rocket, airplane, you go on and on of that instability versus stability. So we talk a lot about how to gain stability in the stroke. Some of it has to be some...
But nothing's out there to measure grip pressure to stabilize.
Well, there is. So if you look at force, right, and you say, okay, I'm applying force in an area, or pressure, as we call it, right? So how do I apply that force? So as I apply that force, that putter is going to move. Right? So if I look at that orientation change around that torque, as we call it, the angular force, we can measure that. Yeah, we just simplify it.
Or would you say your personal feel grip pressure?
Your question is, what's my personal feel for grip pressure?
Yeah.
You know, if you're measuring a 1 out of 10, and 10 is the tightest, and 1 would be the softest. I've always felt softer like a 3. And I don't know that that's accurate. That's my feeling for it. But I would say most of the amateurs that I see are gripping too tightly with not just their hands, but their arm pressure. You know, if you pull this putter from me now, see how my elbow bent and went with you? I think most amateurs I go are like this, right, where you can't pull that. And if the grip pressure and arm pressure is too tight, it's really hard to have a nice free-flowing swing. It's not going to happen, is it? And what do you, is there an ideal grip pressure, or how about
you want it equally distributed between these two clamps. I just want to think about what the hands are really mechanically, the two clamps. Yeah, and in between those two clamps, I have a coupler, right? So that's apply force, and there's a coupler in between. Yeah, so what we want this to do is we want that to be balanced out. So again, we talk about these ratios, it's the same thing. So we know Brad's stroke, how much force he's applying to that putter, and we wanted to see it balance out. So if that's balanced out, his timing will be consistent, his backstroke speed versus forward stroke speed, his rotations change, all those things start to line up. But again, I don't have to get really complex. I can say it very simply to him, say, hey, what do we see with your time? I want to repeat that time, that ratio that he has. And now as far as his length versus speed, that ratio stays the same. Now I'm backing into how he applies force to that putter, right? So he learned it through lots and lots of motions, right, with feedback, seeing what the putter was doing, what the ball was doing, and then back into learning how to do it. We now, because of technology, can speed up that learning curve. So it took him millions of motions, maybe we can do it in 10,000 motions.
And measure accuracy.
Yes.
So the backstroke and the forward stroke timing always remains the same, even if it's a 5-foot putt or it's a 40-foot putt?
The question was a good question. We talked about this a little bit early on. The backstroke time and the forward stroke time. And that forward stroke time is the time measured from transition to impact, not to the end of the follow-through. So there's that ratio that we're trying to make the same every time. So if we can get the backstroke numbers to repeat at all lengths of putts, doesn't matter if it's a 3-footer, a 13-footer, or a 33-footer, and it doesn't matter if it's a green speed of 8 or 14 at Augusta, those numbers are the same. Do you want to add to that, or is that spot on?
And the club head essentially goes back a little more for the...
Well, on the longer putts, yes.
A little faster.
Well, yes, and you saw that when we measured. Were you here to see the short putt versus the long putt? I'll hit 2 of those, short putt and then a long putt. You can see the difference in the numbers. Michael, is this set up for the right? All right, so we'll do the short putt here. This will be a 4-foot putt.
Again, you see the time? Now let's watch these two numbers. So we're going to keep hitting this until he has the speed that he likes with the putter. So when he says, yeah, I like that speed for that distance,
a little faster. Yep.
2.7. But what we want to look for is now he says the speed is good. All right, check. But how much length did he need to create that speed? And did he do it in frequency? Right? So we know he's in frequency, so that's check. Now we're looking at length to speed ratio. When he puts his best, those ratios do not change.
What is that ratio? Is there a supposed to be or an ideal?
Well, it depends on your profile.
Right.
Tour
That was the
average.
4-foot putt. You want me to see a longer putt?
So 86 divided by 27, right?
You got to have a calculator for that, Mike? You're the scientist.
California math.
I could do that in my head.
3.18. So he bounces between 3.14.
So is that in my normal range?
That's right in there.
Are you okay with those numbers? Okay.
It's you.
That's me. All right, so I'm going to hit what's that?
I just want you to repeat it.
Right, so this is a hypothetical, let's call it a 40-footer on a 11.5 speed green. This better be 3 point something, Mike.
3.08.
So within 6 100ths of a second, no, 3 100ths of a second.
And what was the tempo? Is it the same?
So again, pretty good. The other one was 0.55 and 0.33. So you're repeating those numbers, and that, like we said early on, if you can use that as your base to where you start off, a lot of other things come out pretty good. And for distance control, I mean, it's an automatic, isn't it? Center face contact, automatic.
You're asking face rotation, it's automatic. Yeah, because we're constraining you now, right? Yeah. How do you apply
That's a good question. You have a question?
With all the time that you spent on putting greens in your career, you know, with different players and the people that you've seen that have been in slow putting, is their time generally too slow versus too fast?
That's a great question. So she just asked Michael, this is pretty good. The people that I've spent time with that have been in slumps, you said, that haven't putted well, it's, in my opinion, and he doesn't know your question yet, but I'll ask that afterwards. I would say 85 to 90% of the players are too slow. Almost always. And with amateur golfers, yes. And what happens is they go back so slow, and there's such a violent change of direction, and that change of direction speed happens at the transition, and sometimes it happens and it keeps going, or it's happened so quick, so early that it slows down and decelerates into the ball.
Who would be considered like Brett Monk is pretty fast, his timing's pretty fast. Who else has a faster timing?
Well, Jeff Sluman, we talked about him. Were you here when we talked about Sluman? He's got fast timing. She just asked a great question. She asked if players that are not putting well, that are in a slump, or do they have a tendency to be too slow or too fast?
Too slow.
I said 80 to 85% of the time. Close?
Yeah, too slow and too long.
Too slow and too long, and then violent change of direction.
Yeah, and then because they're in that, they only have so much energy, right? So now how do I get it going the other way? So I have this big long, so if I just go at it, I'm going to send it way too hard. So then they slow it down, and then they start changing the orientation. You hit the brakes.
And you know what? Just watching them, you can use this device to chip and work on your timing with chipping, and it's amazing how chipping has become this mad nationwide, worldwide epidemic, and we've seen it in some of the elite players in the world. And slow, long, and then violent, and then where you missed the ball, or you hit behind the ball, or you top it, and lots of movements in the wrong directions. So I was out at Blast headquarters doing some of the videos and some of these dynamic pictures that we have up here. But we worked, Mike Fox, wherever Mike is here, we worked on timing of pitch shots. I had never really used the device for 60, 70-yard pitch shots, and I was a little slow. And I had been struggling with just contact for a normal, driving sort of wedge shot. And I picked up the pace of my backswing, and it was like, oh my God, this is too easy. And it was like just hitting these 4-footers. And it's fun, you can have a competition with your buddy. He has his going, or you have yours. It's something you can do on your own or with others. And I mean, that's why I'm sold on it.
Along those lines, so your timing, your signature is a little bit faster than and the 0.6, 0.3.
Yeah.
Is your chipping a little bit faster too when it's better? Your chipping and pitching?
Well, interestingly enough, my chipping was slower. So that helped me immediately with...
So now it's a little faster.
Yeah, I had gotten in the habit where a lot of players I took the lessons, was kind of watching the face a little bit. You know, when you start doing that, you lose a little bit of that instinct. That made a difference. Well, yes, for short shots. The tempo of your pitch shots and your putts, chip pits and putts, is that 2-to-1 ratio. Now, when you get into more force and longer swing, then it goes to 3-to-1. Right. And that's, you brought up a good point, a good question. And again, Mike's a great guy to verify that. But I mean, most of it. So with chip shots, it's the same ratios, isn't it? And is again the same tendencies with players would be too slow, too long, too slow, too long. Right. And I played with some of the great chippers in my career. Hubert Green, who I always thought was a great chipper. Jose Maria Olazabal, maybe the best I've ever seen. Ray Floyd. Those guys had kind of short, almost on the quicker side. They weren't like lazy looking. Like a flop shot would be a different animal, wouldn't it? The timing is the same. Yes.
Yeah. Because the body knows if it's here and there, what it's got to do. Right? So now you kind of set yourself up for failure. So I need so much of that chemical and elastic energy, that potential energy. What am I going to do with it? So now it's like, uh-oh, I got too much. So then I got to hit the brakes somewhere. But now, if I'm hitting the brakes and then under the gun, our heart rate's too rough, and I'm trying to go and just get it right, you got no shot.
Again, this is our founder, Mike Bentley, if he just showed up late. He knows more about this than anybody on the planet. Anybody else have any questions you want to ask, or we haven't talked about anything, want to see anything? We missing anything? I could sit here and putts all day long. I like this, but yes.
Length of follow through. Does that make a big difference?
Length of follow through. I
talked about Jordan Spieth was shorter.
So early on, I told a story about watching Ben Crenshaw hit some putts. I don't know. You weren't standing there before, but Crenshaw had told me in the '80s that he liked a longer backstroke and a shorter follow through, where the world had been taught low, slow, short, long follow through. And I started watching Crenshaw. It was amazing to me how still some of the, if you look through the history, some of the legends of the game, they actually almost popped the stroke, had a lot of energy right at the ball. Follow-throughs were short. Gary Player, Bobby Locke, Billy Casper. They didn't have that putter going way up in the air. And you know, what we play in Pro-Ams, I would say there are so many amateur golfers that have this look to their follow-through versus when you watch the professional, it's pointing right back in the air. The putter hasn't gone a long way. So what have you seen as far as length of follow-through?
Yeah, so again, if we were talking about this frequency, right, this 2-to-1 frequency, so as Brad has his frequency, his backstroke time and his forward stroke time, what is that frequency? He also has a frequency between impact and finish. So there's also a ratio there. So let's say the standard that we see out there on tour is 0.6 from address to top, 0.60 seconds. I see 0.30 seconds from top to impact, and then another 0.30 seconds from impact to finish. So if Brad's talking about the amateur players having trouble, we'll see a 0.8, a 0.2, and a 0.7. So the frequency is out of alignment. So they're out of phase. So we're trying to see the 6, 3, 3. Oh, great. And again, it's a signature that we've learned. So if I get 6 and 3, what we also see fix is the other side without having to even talk about it. We measure it, obviously, but for the certified coaches, we go into the details of those kinematics. But to make it really simple for us as coaches and players, we just go 6 and 3. We know 6 and 3 gives us a 3 on the other side.
Question about the ratios.
Yep.
So, question about the ratio. If the ideal is around 2-to-1.
Yep.
But Brad Faxon is 1.6, 1.7 from what we've seen. As a teaching pro, how are we supposed to take that information? If I have a student that's 1.6, do I try to change them to 2-to-1?
Great question. Yeah, so what do I do first? So I'll deal with, again, if I'm looking at Brad for the very first time, we're looking at Justin Thomas for the first time, whatever it is. We have them hit a bunch of putts, and we start asking questions. We're trying to get our facts. What's the story that we have going on here? So with that player, we'll have them hit 20, 30, 40 putts and start seeing the time. We don't show them what's going on, we just have them putt around. Left to righters, right to lefts, downhill, uphill. We start to see where they're putting really well, where they're consistent with that variance, and where the outliers are. As soon as I see a big outlier, I ask a question. Do you like this style of putt? Is this giving you trouble? Is this your strength? Is this your weakness? I start asking those questions. And I start seeing there's going to be an average that they go to. Now, again, 99% of the players out there are going to fall in that 6-3 range. And we have like Brad who goes on one side of it. We have Lauren Roberts who goes on another side. Ian Baker Finch, right? So it's not saying you can't do it that way. They've learned how they like to apply their force. So their force back and their force through is just their signature. But if you look at how close that is versus the others, 6-3. Now us as amateur golfers, we don't have a signature that we repeat. Brad has a more aggressive back and through. That's just his style. Right? If you watch Brad with the wedge, you watch Brad with the driver, you watch Brad with the putt, the signatures are there. Now when we get out of frequency a little bit, as he says, hey, I'm going to tune this in slightly. Perfect. So I look for what is that frequency. And if they are a 1.7, 1.8, great. Can they repeat it? And then I always work on backstroke first before we go to forward stroke second, and Brad does the same thing.
So you take them, okay, let's hit some downhill, some uphill, left to right,
Exactly.
right to left, and see how...
Yeah, and I love to even play with different speeds if I can. Hey, go hit it across cement. Let's hit it across the rough. Let's hit it on the putting green. What do we see different? Is it the same, or do you change? The best players in the world don't change. They don't care. The force that they've learned to apply back and through is always symmetrical. So if I use 1 Newton back, I use 1 Newton forward.
Let's say if you're using this to teach, you know, Michael said he goes and asks all these questions, watches players hit different putts in different speeds, different lengths, different slopes. You know, you can find out if the player's been putting well or if he's been playing poorly too. You know, if he's been putting poorly and his numbers are fast like mine or slow like Lauren's, but he's putting poorly, then you have this goal to go towards, and let's either speed you up or slow you down, but get you consistent. Like you said, get him on 0.6 in the backstroke and just work on that one number. Now, it's easy to do, and it's something that, you know, for all of us that say, God, I hit it great on the range and I hit it lousy in the course, or I putted good on the putting green and couldn't bring it out there. This is something that's simple enough to do, but it actually has an effect on everything else that you do. And, you know, you can sit in some of these seminars like I was in last night, and my brain was boggled by the amount of information out there that's not usable. We can use a bigger word to show who's smart. I think this is, you want something that's actually applicable and helpful to your golfers, right? I know you probably play and teach, and you don't want somebody to use this once and say, I don't like that. You want them to keep coming back. Yes, sir.
You say you work just on backswing first.
Backswing time, yeah.
Backswing time.
Without paying attention to forward stroke. Okay, well, I find what I do is I can get my backstroke, say, 65, 70, and my downstroke can become 35, 40. Now, in order to get that down to 25, I have to change that backstroke, which I can do. I can make it shorter.
I would say yes.
So,
You want to work on the
just
backswing
working
before
on
the
one
downswing.
doesn't seem to work. Does that work for most people, just getting the backstroke without paying attention?
Yeah, so again, it's stretch versus short, right? Load versus unload. So what energy I'm putting into it versus I'm going to take it out. So if I get the backstroke efficient, the downstroke is also changing too. So you can't change one without changing the other. They're all tied together. So as I get the backstroke more efficient, the downstroke will get more efficient.
Listen, we've gotten to the limit. We're at 11 o'clock. I know you have more presentations. We'll probably be around here for a little while if you want to ask any more questions offline. But thanks for stopping by. Thanks for showing your interest in Blast. Michael, thank you for having me. And thank you for being up here. Thanks so much. I heard you have the best course on Nantucket.
Yeah, when are you coming by? When are you
I go there with a buddy of mine.